Thank you. I think we've got a quorum going here, right? I can't see everybody on my screen, but yep, one, two, yep, we sure do.
Yes, we have the
All
full
right,
subcommittee.
fantastic. So, hello, everyone. I'm John Oliver, counselor from Ward 1. We are being audio and video recorded. This is I don't know if it's fair to call this regular or not, but I don't think it is. So I'm going to go with this is an irregularly scheduled meeting of the Rules Subcommittee of the City Council. Tonight, I am joined by members of the council. Bill Humphrey. I've got Lyle Baker and Josh Krinsman from the subcommittee. We're also joined by councilors Maliki, Block, Lucas, and I think that's everybody. In terms of counselors, I hope we get a few more people swinging through. In particular, I hope we have someone talking to a couple of our items here. But without further ado, we have 3 items on the agenda. I do want to save what I expect to be the larger or the preponderance of our conversation for the last item. So I would like to take items. I want to go in the order of 2, 3, 1 here. The first item would end up being changing the start time of city council meetings when the council is set to receive a presentation from the mayor or perhaps the city on a broader note, and move that start time earlier so that we're able to kind of end at a reasonable hour on a regular basis. And I don't know, like, Tariq, did you want to talk to this for a couple minutes? So hands already up. Councilor Lucas.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So yes, I submitted this rule change maybe a month or 2 ago. It's pretty simple. The full council meeting will start at 7 o'clock as opposed to 7:45 on any day in which the mayor or the administration needs to present something to the full council. An example of that would be in a few weeks, we're going to hear the mayor's FY26 budget presentation the day after Patriots Day. That will, an example, that meeting would start at 7. The state of the city, that meeting would start at 7. The presentation of I believe it's the capital improvement plan and then the 5-year financial forecasts, those meetings would start at 7, or any other meeting in which the mayor or the administration needs to present something to the public. It's just basically to move up the start time to 7, and that's it. So you have it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I appreciate the intro. A couple of hands in the air. Councilor Baker.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the thought behind this. However, I'm not yet persuaded to vote for it, and I'll explain why. I think that part of the difficulty we've experienced, and maybe it was more from prior administrations, was that the administration would sort of think that they could come to and call a time, and no disrespect to any administration by my comments, and have the council convene to take up their item. And frankly, I think that items like this, where they're informational, are best heard as a committee of the whole, where the council can be convened for that purpose if you want to do it on a special basis. What I'm a little uneasy about is having the council addressed in a way that is not part of a docketed item. And so I prefer to have the items come to us, and then they can be presented as part of the committee of the whole. We've done that in the past. And the other concern I have, frankly, is that there are a number of us who had reservations about moving the start time precisely because of the one opportunity to have supper, and in case of a Monday or Tuesday night, but especially a Tuesday night, I run into a potential problem as a teacher because my class will run until 7:30 sometimes. So so those are some of my misgivings, although I do appreciate the idea of getting us in and getting us out, which is the basic reason for this as I hear it from the author.
All right, thank you, sir. Counselor Krinsman. From the road.
There we go. Thank you, Counselor Oliver. Yes. I think I told you I was going to be out of town tonight, so I apologize, but I will be listening and trying to join as possible. I appreciate the sentiment of this. I know we had a long discussion about moving all council meetings earlier. I actually think this represents a fairly good compromise in that vein. I think what Counselor Lucas is looking at makes sense. Let me just say that I think as far as the rules go, I don't know that we need regimented start times either for the council meetings or the special council meetings, as it were, with presentations. I think we ought to just sort of build in the flexibility for the president to set the time as appropriate, because my concern, at least, I think this is one of Councilor Lucas's concerns, is that if we have these big presentations on a night and it starts at 7:45, we essentially lose that night as a council to really debate and go in depth on topics that might otherwise require longer debate. So I don't like that. I don't like losing time for the council to debate serious items. So I'm in favor of this. I'm also in favor of just a general statement that the council president can set the time of the meetings as opposed to requiring them to all start at 7:45. Thanks.
All right, thank you, sir. Counselor Humphrey.
Thank you. This seems like a reasonable proposal to me from Counselor Lucas. I think maybe we might want to do something along the lines of what Counselor Krinsman just said in terms of having some discretion, because it's also sometimes the case that there's nothing really significant on the agenda on a night that happens to be a presentation or speech from the mayor. I also think, like, yeah, we've discussed about earlier start times in general, and I think there's definitely some arguments for keeping it at 7:45 in general. So, I'm not trying to make this some sort of widespread feature here per se. That being said, if I'm understanding Councilor Lucas's proposal correctly, and I think I am, we're talking what, like 3 times a year that this would apply, right? So,
Sounds about right.
that to me, that seems fine. And honestly, I've been wondering this for a long time myself, why not just have the mayor? I mean, especially because you got to get through first call first as well. And so then that's also kind of weird because then, like the mayor isn't speaking right at 7:45 anyway. And, I guess maybe the idea is you aim for 8. I don't know. But to me, it seems like there have definitely been some problem dates in the past 5 years that I can think of where we did have significant items for second call that were unrelated entirely to what was, being discussed by the mayor, but it happened to fall on that day. And in a number of cases, we either had to punt those to another day because everyone was too tired to deal with it, or, and this is, I think, the worst possible outcome, is we did in fact take up those items, but everyone was tired and angry, and we got bad outcomes on those items because people were just trying to get home. And so they weren't necessarily, speaking their mind or voting how they might have otherwise voted if they didn't, if they weren't worried about hitting 11 o'clock or whatever. So, I think there's a good argument to be made for having some discretionary flexibility there as well. But like, and I think it, we don't want that to be applied to every meeting, but I think for these specifics, and again, I think we're talking about like 3 meetings a year. So, to my mind, it's reasonable, I think. And I think it's also somewhat unusual for it to fall on a Tuesday. I think most of these are going to be Mondays, and it just happened that this year that's kind of how the budget cycle shook out versus the holiday.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, good points there. I appreciate that. Counselor Baker, back to you.
Yeah, just I can see that argument. I'm not in favor of giving general discretion because I think that just doesn't give people enough predictability. The one thing I would do is I would modify the language in the draft a little bit to indicate the mayor or the is anticipated. I think, I'm not sure, the language I saw seemed to talk about as past tense, and I don't have it in front of me, but I recall it seemed like if you're going to do it. But the question is, those items are unusual situations where, again, maybe my procedural hat is I'm wearing it too hard, but I'd like to see the mayor's appearances before the council or these things be part of a regular docketed item of some sort, so that we have some ability, because we've had situations in the past where someone said, I want to talk to the council, and there's no item before us. They just want to speak to us. And I think that's beyond the scope of what we ought to do. So I think I could be persuaded to do this as recommended, with a slight adjustment in the language to clarify it's anticipated and not a casual request. And then and Councilor Humphrey's point about the few times a year it occurs, I think, is fair enough.
Councilor Humphrey?
Yeah, I guess I was hoping to get some clarity on this point, though, because maybe this is just that you're referring back to some precedents that are
I think they were
beyond
really
my
more
time,
before your time on the council, but they were situations
Okay.
where we seem to be subject to sort of, well, I'd like to talk to the council, and then the conversations went on. It wasn't a structured event.
Okay, well, because I have no interest in doing that, right? I don't think most of us want to be sitting there for more of those meetings, right? But something like the state of the city, is that a docketed item? I don't think so. But I have no problem with the state of the city address, happening.
Yeah, I don't think that's docketed, right?
Obviously,
No,
the budget is a
that is
docketed
not
one.
docketed.
Budget,
CIP, I
sure,
think,
yeah.
is docketed, but state of the city, I don't think is docketed.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think it is.
Well, I like to see things docketed before the council, not just showing up, right? Even though you put a good name on it, and it's the mayor, and so there you are. But
Well, I'm not
That's
disputing
independent.
whether or not that's a good idea. I'm asking if that's been the current practice.
Yeah, I'm 99% sure that like, for example, State of the City is not a docketed item, but it is fairly well kind of socialized and scheduled, even if that's, somewhat informal. Whereas budget obviously is, like, that is kicked off. I believe that is always the first step in the budget process, right? Is hearing
Yeah.
from the mayor.
But even then, I mean, those are docketed items, but we're not taking them up as like second call items and then inviting the mayor to speak on them.
That is true. They're treated as kind of invited in within the rail or escorted into the rail. But yeah, no, they're not discussed as, to your point. So,
Well, I
Like
think
we're not
question of-
voting to hold or voting to, whatever after the mayor's speech.
No,
Right.
but I mean, the point is, an opportunity to address the council could be a docketed item by itself. This is just my being fussy about it, but that's not part of the item. That's just trying to say, I'd like to have some clarity about when and how these things happen. And one way to make them a little more regular is to say, okay, we'll present the capital improvement plan. That'll be a docketed item. We'll have the state of the city address. They'll just be, and then they can be called for that moment in time when we want to meet early.
and
That's
then
all.
what? Assign them to committee of the whole and NAN them?
Yeah, no, they would just be, they would be assigned to the committee, the council as committee of the whole. We hear the mayor and then we're done. There's no action necessary.
All right. Interesting. Counselor.
That's independent of start time. That's really
Yeah.
not the merits of this. item.
Understood. Counselor Lucas, or do you want to let Counselor Maliki go first, or?
Go ahead.
Yep, great, thank you.
I was just curious, and I should remember this, but I don't. When we have things like the tax classification hearing or the water and sewer rate setting hearing, I think my recollection is we tend to do those before the 7, like as a separate schedule thing before the 7:45.
Yeah, that's
regular
committee
start.
of the whole.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's committee of the
that's
whole,
committee
and
of the
that's,
whole.
you'd still do those that way.
Okay, so that this would Councilor Lucas's proposal would totally separate from that type of thing. Okay, just checking.
Yep,
At least as
good
I hear it.
question, though. Good question. Counselor Lucas, does the, before you go, like, can you also kind of speak to the, the adjustment that we're kind of hearing here? President's discretion, so to speak.
Yeah. So I'll get to that in a second. I just
Yep.
want to read it into the record. Counselor Baker, because you said you didn't have the language in front of you. But the proposed language is regular meetings of the council where a presentation is received from the mayor or city staff shall begin at 7. That's the language that the clerk's office and I came up with.
The only question I was thinking, to be received, on it, right? That's all.
Yeah. Or to be heard, or is planned
Yeah.
for, that sort of thing.
Yeah, if you want to wordsmith that, I'm fine with it. But basically, I like the language minus an adjustment here or there. The intent of this, yes, is to move up the start time of a meeting when we are going to receive a large presentation in some sort from the mayor or the mayor's staff. That is the intent of this amendment to our rules. As far as potentially adjusting the language at the president's discretion, I don't know how I would feel about that. I understand where some folks are coming from, where I think it was Councilor Humphrey who said, if it's a light meeting and no items on second call, why not just move the thing up to 7? But someone could put an item on second call at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. That is their privilege. And I don't want to take that away from someone. So I wouldn't be a fan of adjusting the language at the president's discretion. I would just say, you know what, full council meetings, mayor is presenting something. Let's move it up to 7. Thanks.
All right, thank you, sir. Councilor Krinsman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you can hear me.
We got you.
Okay, my 2 comments are, one, I am not sure that the state of the city would be considered a presentation by the mayor, though I think my understanding was that this amendment was intended to get at that scenario. So I just would like to caution that and maybe think about the language. My second point is that rather than shall begin at 7, this is where my compromise sort of comes in, and I would rather just say may begin at 7 p.m. at the discretion of the president, or something along those lines. Again, I don't want to provide a presumption under the rule that because an external body to the council has announced they intend to come present, that suddenly our start time changes. But I think the instances in which the city council expects to hear from an external party, like the state of the city, like the budget, I think it makes sense to start those at 7. And it feels to me that the easiest way is to talk about participation of a non-city council party is expected, and then provide discretion for the president to start those meetings at 7. Again, with a may begin at 7 p.m. at the discretion of the president.
I'd be supportive of that because I didn't understand what you were proposing before. So I didn't want to give general discretion to start the meeting early, but if it's subject to the president's discretion for this purpose, then that seems appropriate.
I love it when we agree.
Councilor Humphrey?
Yeah, I also, again, I do see the rationale for having just a little bit of wiggle room here so that in all likelihood it would be 7, right? But that, as Councilor Krinsman said, that the mayor's office is not dictating. There was a couple other things wordsmithing wise. One thing is it says city staff, which is very broad. I was wondering if maybe it should say administration staff. I understand that's kind of a vague distinction, but that's what we're getting at anyway. I don't think we're talking about like a departmental head, a random departmental head, but obviously Ms. Lemieux is technically a department head. And so I would probably lean towards something like administration staff. Do we want to say, I think this was Councilor Baker had brought up something along these lines, where a presentation is anticipated to be received?
Yep.
We could say presentation or address.
Yep. I wrote down when I heard a minute ago, not everything, the state of the city might not be considered a presentation, but it is definitely an address. So I
So,
did write that down.
so that my suggested wording for the entire sentence is regular meetings of the council where a presentation or address is anticipated to be received from the mayor or administration staff may begin at 7 p.m. at the discretion of the president.
I'd support that.
Second, third.
Fourth.
Great, so we are unanimous. I love it. If I had a gavel, I'd use it right now. Jacqueline, did you get that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
I
great.
can also email it just to be safe because I wrote it down.
Yeah, sure.
If you do want to, I was typing it in as you were saying it, but just to make sure that's accurate.
Well, that's because you're a professional, so.
All the compliments are flying tonight. I love it. All right. So unless there are any other thoughts, comments on that particular item, I would like to move on to item number 3 on our list, which was or is the development of a policy to honor, and I still think this is a typo in the way we have this written. I don't think it's just longest serving counselors, but long serving counselors. But I'm not sure if we've been joined by anyone else who could speak to that more definitively, and we have not.
I also had the assumption that you had.
That it was long serving.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think longest serving might be encompassed by long serving.
Right.
Right. So it's a little more expansive if we don't use the
Could
superlative.
I recuse myself from this conversation since I'm the longest serving?
Are you the longest serving ever or just?
No, Wendell Bachman did 55 years. I'm at
Oh my
41
goodness.
plus. So I got a ways to chase him.
Yeah, but yes, you do. But I do believe that and correct me if I'm wrong here, Jacqueline, but I think we do have some homework coming in on this particular item. Is that true? Am I making that up?
Yes. So internally within the clerk's office, we looked back at the history of what the council has done. Generally, what we were able to find was when counselors generally passed away and or left the council, that is when a resolution was done. It is something we can go and codify more in practice and ensure that the lapses in the last couple terms where at the end of a term, all retiring counselors received a resolution detailing their experience is back into practice and continuing on with honoring counselors who have dedicated their time to the council.
Which makes sense to me. I don't think this was ever intended to be more than let's just document what we do and perhaps want to continue to do moving forward. I don't think this was meant to be, an exploration into, what could or perhaps even should be done, but more or less just documenting what it is so that we're consistent over time. At least that's my take on it. If there's anybody here who has a different look at it or sense of it, let me know. But I'm inclined to basically, like Jacqueline, why don't you and I write that up and attach to the next packet and just keep it like really concise and clear. And one question that I do have about this particular item or this topic is, does it belong in the rules or is this more city council, policy slash, more informal than rules? Any thoughts on that? Because I do believe that, this could easily be put in the rules, but I'm not sure it's at that kind of level of officialness. Officialdom, whatever. Councilor Krinsman?
Thank you. Yeah, I lean against officialdom in the rules. I agree with you. I don't think the rules seems like the appropriate place. I think our policies and procedures, our customs, you know, not all counselors are equal, and I think we ought to retain the discretion to appropriately recognize, again, as appropriate. So the rules doesn't seem like the place for this, though I fully support the sentiment.
Yeah, no, agree. Yeah, that was not, I agree. Certainly not intended as a slight to the notion or the intent here by any means. Okay, so we'll get this written up. We'll look at it one last time, or we will look at it again in writing. I'll make sure that Counselor Albright sees it because I believe this item was from her originally. But we'll see this in, you know, like I said, in writing. Maybe Jacqueline, what we do is we make sure it's in the kind of that final red line that we'll all see before we approve everything and then bring it to programs and services as a whole.
Yes, we can make sure that's prepared for that.
Great. Love it when a plan comes together. And moving on with kind of what I consider to be, or what I expect to be kind of the larger ticket item here for conversation tonight, is the item that we're describing as reviewing the referral of a rezoning petition when it accompanies a special permit. We just saw one of these recently, so Counselor Block, I don't know if you wanted to kind of spend a couple of minutes just stepping us through, you know, the thought process that led you to the letter that you shared with us, or that was shared with the subcommittee, I believe, yesterday.
Okay,
Is
that was
is
my
that all
first
right?
question. My first question was that the memo that I wrote up on this and sent to you, John, you shared it with the rest of the committee.
Yes, sir. It's actually in the packet now as well.
I think
Okay, good.
Counselor
So-
Baker had some concerns about open meeting law and
Yeah,
suspension
so-
of the rules.
I think Jacqueline says it was noticed in the agenda, but we do need to suspend the rules to consider something that's not in the packet.
Yes, thank you for that reminder. I appreciate that. We do need to suspend the rules to accept this document into the record and be able to discuss it.
So moved.
Great, thank you. Everyone in favor, please say aye.
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 All right.
Any nay votes on that one? Abstentions? Great, unanimous approval. Please proceed, Counselor Block.
I just want everybody to know that this practice of the city council sending a zoning change and special permit on the same parcel to the land use committee has been something that I've discussed from before my swearing in. I've talked to President Laredo, Chair Baker, Chair Kelly about this. So I just want everybody to know this is not a recent concern. It's not related strictly to the example that we just had before us at our last meeting. Though I think that what happened at 386, 390 Watertown is an illustration of the seriousness of zoning change. First of all, I think you all know the percentage of work that the land use committee does that involves this situation, a zoning change and a special permit, is very small. I think we've had 2 such examples in the current session out of scores of special permit requests. So at least 95%, maybe 99% of a land use committee's time is spent just on strict special permit petitions. So when this comes up, I will have to tell you it's a novelty It raises questions that we don't normally discuss in land use. And I have asked from the beginning why, when we have a zoning and planning committee where the city council's expertise resides on our zoning system, why that committee is not involved in situations like this. And I'll just have to say that the only answer I've really gotten is we want to be efficient. We want to save time. Maybe some of you will have more of a defense of the current practice, but that seems to me to be what I've heard. And by taking this practice and saving time, which no doubt it does, we do a couple things. First, we don't involve the Zoning and Planning Committee, where, as I said, our knowledge and experience regarding zoning lies. And secondly, sort of the converse, we ask the Land Use Committee to do something that it's not used to doing. And that's, in some ways, what just happened with 386, 390 Watertown Street. I just need to say that I raised this because I think zoning changes are very, very important. That we should not be doing them easily. There ought to be a rigorous review of them, even when it's just a single parcel, because a zoning change has implications for the rest of a neighborhood. A special permit can as well, but that's constrained by the metrics in our zoning ordinances that special permits can only go so far. Zoning changes can go anywhere we want them to go. So that's my overall view of this. So why don't I just stop there and let other people react or ask me questions, or I'll just listen in on what your discussion is like.
All right, fair enough. Counselor Lucas.
Thank you. And just, Chair, are you saying Counselor O. Lucas? Because that's what it sounds like.
I'm attempting to say Counselor Lucas.
Okay, it sounds like O. Lucas, so I don't know.
Well, it was just
St.
Patty's Day,
Patrick's
you
Day
never
has
know.
already gone by.
All right, that's right. St. Patrick's Day. Okay, so just so everyone knows, I am opposed to the rule change that has been proposed by Councilor Block. I have some reasons in front of me, so just let me go through them, please.
Please.
So this would slow down the special permit process, no doubt. So under the proposed rule, ZAP would hear the petition first, then land use would hear the petition. Land use cannot and will not hear the petition until the zone change is approved by the full council. And on top of that, there is still another 20-day waiting period after the full city council approves a change in zoning. Excuse me. Newton is known for having a very slow special permit process. This will not help at all. If anything, this would slow it down even more. The proposed rule also requires additional work for city staff and for neighbors and abutters and Newton residents. And what I mean by that is the city clerk's office, who I believe sends out the legal notices, they would have to send out the legal notice for the zoning and planning public hearing for the change in zone. And eventually, if it comes around to land use, they have to do the same thing all over again. It requires 2 sets of public hearings at different times. So that means residents and abutters, advocates will need to attend a set of public hearings for the zone change in ZAP. And then they have to attend another set of public hearings for the special permit in land use. Also, during the public hearing in ZAP, the planning board will need to deliberate on whether or not to recommend a zone change to ZAP. So that will also take a lot of time. It also creates, in my opinion, unnecessary work for the ZAP committee clerk, because they then have to write up reports on the public hearing and the meetings, when right now they don't have to at all. It only is the land use clerk who does it. Serving on land use for 4 years, I have never felt it difficult to distinguish between the legislative and quasi-judicial responsibilities that we have. And just on a personal note, when we've had these before, I think on 2 occasions, I have voted for a change in zone, but voted against the special permit. The other thing I would also bring up is that if a petitioner wants to change a parcel of land, the zoning, that would go to ZAP. But what if the plans change in between ZAP and land use? What happens then? Does the zone change still go through? Yes, of course, the city council has already voted for it, but the plans could change and the petitioner could do a different project instead. I'm reminded of the Craft Street senior housing that went from different zones to business use 4. And as some of you probably know, that project is not going to happen, and it's going to be multi-family housing. This is what I mean. The project could change. Economics could change. Let's see. The idea of the land use committee approving the zone change and special permit at the same time means we will know precisely what will happen when we change the zone. We know what project we are going to receive and what will be built. And I have received an email from Councilor Kelly, who was the chair of land use. She is opposed to the rule change, just like me. She has also said that President Laredo is also opposed to the rule change. And for the record, President Laredo is a former chair of land use. So that is all I will say for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councilor. Councilor Baker.
So I appreciate Councilor Block's thoughtfulness on this, and also hearing from the vice chair. The situation here is emblematic of the challenge we had, because these are not generic zone changes. They're parcel-based zone changes, and that's part of the difficulty they pose as a policy matter in general, because there is a doctrine in the law that's not often invoked, but says that when you make a change in the zone that benefits a landowner that doesn't have any rational basis to it, but except to benefit the landowner, that's sometimes referred to as spot zoning. Now, it's not the right term for it, but it's just the fact is it's a small parcel, so it's referred to as spot. But the underlying thought is that this does not have a rationale behind it that justifies the zone change, other than just somebody wants to do something. Part of the difficulty that the modification would pose is that we have one particular zone, which has been used a number of times, not a lot, but enough to make it an important example, which the MU4 zone doesn't have a zone for it. It doesn't exist as a place in the city normally, like manufacturing, business, or residential. It is a zone that appears and is designed to absorb a special permit because of the need for some specialized nature of the property, usually a mixed-use project that doesn't fit easily into one category or another. So those projects would be difficult for the land use or the zoning and planning committee to cite without having a sense of what lies behind them. So you know, it's difficult, I think, for me to think of a situation here where it would make sense to do what is being proposed, but I'm open to further education on it. So I just want to give that example as one to consider.
Interesting. Thank you, sir. Counselor Block, back to you.
Thanks. I was a little surprised about the assumption that Councillor Lucas made that this proposal would require the city council to adopt the zoning change prior to the land use committee considering the special permit. That's not in any, that's not in my memo to everybody. That's not in the language. A special permit can be considered by the land use committee conditional upon, the ZAP acting on and the city council acting on a zoning change. That's why when these things do come to the city council, the zoning change is always adopted first because the special permit isn't valid until the zoning change happens. So I just need to say that um, doesn't directly address some of the duplications that Councillor Lucas refers to that would likely have to happen, the notices and to abutters and to the public and all the rest. Yes, it seems to me that's a small price to pay for getting our city council members who sit on the zoning and planning committee to review a zoning change, whether it's to the MU4 or to another BU zone or anything else. I'll just say that President Laredo, muttering under his breath, did seem to be a little more receptive to this than the last time I spoke to him about that. So we'll see if he changes his mind.
Thank you, sir. Counselor Humphrey?
Thank you. I think Councillor Lucas and Councillor Baker summarized a lot of the concerns that I have and articulated points I wouldn't necessarily have thought of either. I think it actually is a pretty significant price to pay if you think about it from the public's point of view. You're asking people, concerned neighbors, to have to show up to like twice as many meetings to participate in public hearings. Like I thought we all kind of agreed that we want the public to be, able to easily come participate in these things and make their voices heard and be able to express their legitimate neighborhood concerns if they have them. And I think this is making it significantly more complicated for them for very little discernible benefit. In fact, it's pretty common for members of the council to get swapped back and forth between land use and zoning and planning over the years. That's definitely not unprecedented. We're all expected to be voting on both zoning and special permit items as a full council, which means to some extent, we're all supposed to have enough baseline understanding of what's going on to be able to sort of make these decisions. And I think Councillor Lucas's point, if I can clarify it for him, what I think he was saying that you were just questioning there is if we have a scenario where zoning and planning goes through their process, closes their hearing, and votes out an item to the full city council, they're voting it out to the full city council. They're not voting it out to the land use committee. The land use committee's public hearing process could continue for months and months, and in fact probably would, because there's a lot more to go over in a special permit than in a zoning request change, just from a technical perspective. The city council as a whole is essentially supposed to vote on items when they come out of the committee. Occasionally we delay them, by 1 or 2 meetings, but we're not going to hold them for 6 months at the full council waiting for land use to come into alignment. So, I don't think this is about pure efficiency. I don't think it's just about saving billable hours for the land use attorneys representing these projects. I think this is just straightforwardly that this is the efficient way to do it in the public's interest, to make sure that we are considering these things that are tied together in one body through a unified public hearing process. So I understand there's some issues with this, but it seems like a significantly better way to do it how we're doing it than what's proposed here, respectfully. Thank you.
Counselor Krinsman? Or I'm sorry, Counselor O. Krinsman.
Thank you, my esteemed colleague. I know this is the rules subcommittee, and I know that we have an unwritten rule on the council to say I'm not going to repeat what others have said and then go on to repeat what others have said, but I'm actually not going to. I just want to say I agree with a lot of what the others have said in opposition to this rule change. I think they're articulated well. The one thing I will add is that the backstop here is that both the zoning change and the special permit, of course, come before the full city council. So it is not that the members of the zoning and planning committee don't ultimately have an opportunity to weigh in on the zoning change. They, of course, as members of the city council do, as all have an opportunity to weigh in on the special permit as well. I think it is a wise process that the city council goes through. It was a good change to make these go to one committee, and I would be opposed to the rule change because I do like the procedure today, though. I appreciate the thought that was given into this proposal.
Right. One thing I do want to bring up, if it's all right, Counselor Block, if I remember in here, your alternative proposal that no one's really spoken to yet, which I thought was interesting, is instead of it, if I'm reading this correctly, instead of sending the package, right, the special permit with the zone change attached, instead of sending that to land use, send it to ZAP. I don't know if anyone here has any thoughts on that. I know I do, but I'm kind of curious what everybody else has to say about that. Counselor Baker, as chair of ZAP, any thoughts on that alternative proposal?
That one I think is the reverse, and I wouldn't support it because that puts us in the special permit area in a way that I think land use does a better job, and I would not. We've got enough work. I think most of us who on the committee know we have a fairly crowded agenda most nights, and I think this would not be the right place to do it. The one comment, I'm also opposed to the change for a variety of the reasons indicated, but I do think there is a point that Councilor Block is raising that may be better handled administratively. We went through, for example, the whole rezoning process to do the shape of what in fact turned out to be the village districts for the compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. I think that the planning department, who has an initial conversation with any developer who comes forward, I think would probably advise, and if they don't, they should be advised to advise, that if somebody comes in with a zone change on the margin of that and says, well, I just want to change the zone for my parcel, that one I think they should indicate is probably going to have a heavy burden of persuasion, because it's, we went through a comprehensive process to fix something. The MU4 is a little different because that's designed otherwise. But anyway, I just wanted to report that part.
Good point again. Thank you, sir. Counselor Block.
Thanks. Well, I can see my proposal has met with a little resistance. I think the example of what we just went through is, to me, an argument for separating these two processes. Nearly all of the objections to 386, 390 Watertown had to do with the zoning change. And very few, if any, of the objections were the design. It was the fact that the current zone, a BU1, doesn't allow for a fourth story, even with a special permit. And that's what the developer wanted to do. So he proposed a zoning change that would allow that to happen. And then, so there was a certain amount, as I saw it, shopping that the developer did to select the zone to change the current zone from and to. So it starts to feel like a game. What zone should we change something to match what we want to build? And to me, that's exactly the reverse of how we should be thinking about this. Even for an MU4, when should we adopt an MU4? What's the criteria that should tell us this is a good idea to select one parcel and zone it differently from neighboring parcels? I'd really like to have a discussion about that. And in fact, I think we might even see a docketed item to that effect to see what the conversation leads us to conclude. That would be great guidance for the Land Use Committee and the City Council as a whole to have. I agree with Councilor Baker that the Land Use Committee really is equipped and used to reviewing special permits. And it is exactly for that reason that the zoning changes, when they come, cause so much difficulty. There have been two. There have been two in the current session. And in both cases, that's what caused concerns. And in the end, in both cases, the developer withdrew those changes. Now, 386, 390 Watertown, we haven't heard the last of that, I'm sure. But the River Street location, that's exactly what happened. It got withdrawn. They redid the design, in which case the new design was allowable by special permit under the existing zone, and that's been approved by committee, approved by the city council. So these are going to take longer. These almost by definition have to take longer than just a straight special permit. And frankly, I think it's a useful message to the developers that if you think that these two things will just be handled simultaneously, and there'll be one set of hearings and one set of notices, and that'll make this go quicker. I actually think part of the reason that I think would be useful for everybody to separate these two is that the developers are not confused, not deluded into thinking this will just go through in one sort of manner, handled in one manner. It's I mean, I understand the kind of comfort of doing these things together. It may seem efficient. It may seem it's more understandable to the public. I actually think the public's confused. They don't understand the difference between a legislative matter and a quasi-judicial matter. They don't understand the difference between a zoning change and a special permit petition. I mean, those are inside baseball kinds of things, and we'll help them understand it if we separate these things, because then we will have to explain it to them in whatever manner we have at our disposal, why these are two different things, why there is a very structured process for a special permit review and deadlines. And if we don't act on it, it becomes approved automatically, so we don't want to do that. And a zoning change, is a legislative matter, and we can consider it for as long as we want to, and never act on it if we choose not to act on it. That's what it means. And by merging these two, I think we invite confusion, and I just don't think it's a good idea. That's it. I've said my piece.
Thank you, sir. Counselor Maliki.
Thank you. I'll try to be coherent here. So I have some
I wish you the
sympathy.
best of luck in that endeavor.
Yeah, I have some sympathy for Counselor Block's proposal because so it seems to me that historically, I guess it's always been felt that there's kind of a comfort factor to approving a zoning change when you know what a developer is proposing to do with it. And that has some appeal. But it seems to me that contrary to what somebody said earlier tonight, we're not actually guaranteed that what project would go with the zoning change. We're not actually guaranteed that's going to happen because, for example, we're seeing right now with Northland, that was originally a zoning change and a special permit, and now they're proposing something completely different with a change to the special permit. Would we have approved the zoning change if they originally came in with what they've got now? Who knows? And I don't know if this has ever happened, but there could be a situation where somebody gets a zoning change coupled with a project approved, and then for whatever reason, 300% tariffs on steel or whatever, they just drop the project, walk away entirely. But the zoning change would still be in effect, right? So we would have no idea what's going to happen. So it seems to me that sort of philosophically, in order to approve a zoning change, we ought to think the zoning change itself is a good idea, independent of what it would allow, because once the zone changes, anything within that zone would be allowed. So that to me is an argument for separating it. If that makes any sense.
If I may, I want to make sure I heard that correctly. Because if we stick with the process we have today, let's just say it was, I don't want to talk about 386 Watertown again, if I can help it. So let's go back to the River Street project. And if we had approved the zone.
I'm sorry, which River Street project are we talking about?
I forget the number. It was right in Nightcap Corner there. It was basically.
Okay, the one down on Lexington and River, almost.
Yes.
Can I speak to this real quick, please?
Of course.
So the zone change and special permit on River Street has not been withdrawn. It was held, and land use has not taken up either since that has occurred. And nothing has been approved at that site on River Street. What Councilor Maliki, I think, and Council Oliver are referring to is on the corner of River and Lexington. That was not a zone change. It was just a special permit to build a 3-story multifamily housing development.
Well, regardless, thank you for that. But let me throw it out. I just want to make sure, my understanding of the way this would work is if someone shows up with a special permit that requires a zone change, if they get the special permit and the zone change, they're tied together. If they don't build what they said in the special permit, the zone change goes away if they don't build that project. Like the zone change and the project are tied together with each other. You don't get the zone change in perpetuity if you don't build the project. I think that is correct, yes? So I wasn't sure if that's what you were saying, Julia, or not.
Okay, maybe it's because we haven't seen an example of that actually happening. But for example, like with Northland, do they need to reapply for their zone change if they're doing such a substantial change to their special permit?
I don't think that they are I don't think that they are reapplying for the zone change, that's only a special permit, right?
They aren't. They aren't.
Right, okay.
Whether they
so it's just a
should,
possibility.
whether they
It's
should
a
be
great
required
question.
to.
It's a great question, because if, for example, said project used to have, or qualify for mixed use, but if it became 100% residential, no mixed use, then I would argue the zone is then wrong. But I don't think that's the case necessarily, maybe primarily, but not entirely, but, probably shouldn't be talking about that particular project now, given that it is in front of us as a council. But yeah, it's an interesting question, because if the project changes significantly enough, the zone change, you might think differently about the change of zone, right? That was attached to special permit A, and if it changes, now you got a significantly different project. Maybe the zone change isn't warranted anymore. But it's an interesting question. And I don't know, Councilor Lucas, is that what is your hand still up, I guess I should say?
Yeah, sorry, I meant to
Okay.
unmute and I
Okay.
lowered my hand. Yeah, my hand is up.
Please.
So I am very uncomfortable talking about open special permits on this committee. Other than the fact I can say, yeah, I don't want to talk about open special permits. Let me just start with that. Considering I'm on land use.
Yes.
So I just want to follow up on a couple things about ZAP. And this was in the agenda. It was the first backup material in the agenda, and that is ZAP right now is free to attend the public hearing for the zone change and special permit in land use. ZAP does not meet on Tuesdays, and they are free to participate. I am reminded of the times when Councilor Baker and Councilor Oliver, excuse me, have sent invitations to land use, asking us to attend ZAP because they were discussing items that were pertinent to the land use committee. I'm thinking of retaining walls, changes of grade, and those items I think from a couple of weeks ago that you heard in ZAP. And also, one thing I want to say, just to follow up on Councilor Block's assertion that the public is confused with the current process of land use being both legislative and quasi-judicial. I can say this, they'll be even more confused if they have to show up to multiple meetings for ZAP and then land use. They're going to ask questions, why aren't we discussing this? Why aren't we discussing that? Well, it's the public hearing for the zone change only. You have to come back in a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two, for the public hearing on the special permit. As again, I said this before, as a member of the land use committee, I am not confused at all when I vote on the zone change and special permit. As I said, I have split my vote twice before at the full council on these matters. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Oops, I muted myself. Councilor Humphrey.
Thank you. Again, not going to repeat Councilor Lucas's points. I think they were very well made. I also don't really understand some of the hypothetical scenarios being discussed here. They don't seem that persuasive to me. If it's an MU4, I'm pretty sure they have to have a special permit anyway. If they want to change it after the fact, they're going to come and request a special permit change. That's what we're seeing happening, and that's fair and reasonable. I don't know the rules in terms of does the zone change expire if they don't build what they said they were going to build when it comes to the other zones, but I would just say if you're not comfortable with that zone change being made, unless it's this specific project, don't vote for the zone change. That's very simple, right? If you're very uncomfortable with the possibilities entailed by a business use whatever district in this area, then don't vote for the zone change, regardless of what you think about the specific special permit. When I vote for a zone change associated with a special permit, I'm saying that I'm comfortable with that zoning being appropriate for that particular site. So again, I don't really understand the scenarios we're discussing. It seems like we're getting a little bit off track here anyway. And, again, Councilor Lucas has succinctly summarized the process arguments for doing it in a consolidated way. And if you think the public is confused about something, it's actually part of your job to explain it to them. That's why we have 24 of us, so that we can go and talk to the public and say, hey, this is why this happens. This is how the way it happens, etc. I've always considered that a significant portion of my job is explaining process and procedure to the public so that they can have maximal ability to have input on our processes. Certainly with the budget, that's a lot of the conversations, even though we don't have as much power as we might want on the council, right? I spend a lot of time explaining to people, here's when to make your voice heard on this part of the process. So, just saying it's confusing, I think is kind of a cop-out argument, and I do think it would be more confusing to do it a different way. Thank you.
Counselor Baker.
So I haven't changed my mind on the merits of the item, but I do think the point that has just been made is important part of kind of the legislative history of what we do with this item, to make sure that when the planning department prepares a memo for consideration by the land use committee, which all of us have access to on another committee, that it make it very clear when a zone change is being proposed, the full scope of what in fact that zone change will allow. It may have a special permit that is being requested incident to that zone change, but I think that part of the potential for confusion that Councilor Block is arguing about, and arguing for the rule change because of that potential confusion, is not really understanding the zone change has potential other alternatives built into it. So I think that the point is not to change the rule about how we proceed on these matters, but make sure that when the matter does come up, that everybody is very clear about what the scope of the zone change would be, with or without this special permit that may be attached to it.
Interesting point, and one that I would rather agree with. Although I do want to separately have a quick follow-up conversation with the city legal staff in terms of, well, why are we reviewing a zone change when the special permit is significantly revised? But that's a totally different question. I also want to make sure that I invite any comment from Councilor Krinsman. He's not on my screen here. His hand is not up. I'm not putting you on the spot. I just want to make sure you're not trying to be heard and haven't been. But in the interim, until I see something change there, I'm going to assume there he is.
No, I was heard earlier. If you
Okay.
recall, I was articulate and agreed with many of the comments that had been made prior. Remain in opposition to this change.
Great. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Does anyone have a challenge, perhaps other than Councilor Block, I guess, to the language that is in the packet that simply calls out that the chair of land use always has the ability at their discretion to invite zoning and planning committee to join a meeting when reviewing the petition, not as a formal matter, but perhaps we need to say the members of the zoning and planning committee, but it does emphasize, I think, what Councilor Block is bringing to our attention here, to invite that commentary. Obviously, everyone is invited from a council perspective to attend those meetings, but it might make sense to call out look, this might be an appropriate time to actively reach out. Councilor Lucas?
Thank you. I think the chair of land use certainly can send an email to ZAP asking them to attend. The question is, does it need to be a rule? If anything, it should be a best practice.
Fair point.
I don't think it needs to be a rule, because I think when you sent us an email, us being land use, on those items in ZAP that land use needed to hear, I don't think it's a rule that the leadership of ZAP needs to send an email to land use inviting them to a ZAP meeting. You just did it on your own because you're an overall good person. But it doesn't need to be a rule.
All right, fair enough. Counselor Baker.
I would concur in that. And also, I think that it implies that the whole committee should be included. And frankly, it may be that we have some expertise on the committee that can come and, you know, in the case of the items where land use came, the chair and the vice chair came, but it didn't, there might have been others that might be appropriate. And I'd leave that to the discretion of the chairs. I think the advantage of what Councilor Block has done, even though it may not be the outcome he'd like as far as changing our rules, I think is to just highlight that a zone change has potential implications beyond and above the special permit that may be associated with it on these cases. And that needs to be clearly stated and everybody needs to understand what the impact is. So for that, I thank him very much. But I'm going to vote against this change.
Understood. Any final comments, thoughts, Counselor Block, before I kind of get a straw vote here from the subcommittee? All right. With that said, what I am gathering here is we have basically a unanimous, not at this time, no thank you, on that particular change, although some of the conversation has certainly brought a lot of merit. So I appreciate that. And myself, I'll second Counselor Baker on that one. So I am not going to be bringing that one forward as we, you know, modify or redline the rules. I'll just kind of make sure that I'm correct and say, all those in favor of this amendment or change, please say aye. All those opposed?
No,
Aye.
no.
Any abstentions? Great. All right. Thank you. And Counselor Block, I do really appreciate the dialogue. I think you do raise a lot of really valid points here, but in the absence of a cohesive, you know, change, I don't think it's going to move forward at this point. But thank you. And with that said, unless anyone has any further questions or comments, I think we can adjourn.
So moved.
Everyone all set? Fantastic. Thank you, Jacqueline, for all of your support here. And thank you, everyone. You have a lovely.
Mr. Chairman, before you,
yes.
I don't know if, I think it's, this may be Ms. Norton's last job or last opportunity to clerk for this subcommittee, if that's the case. And I think we owe her a vote of thanks or applause or whatever the appropriate accolade is for
Second.
important public service.
30. Thanks for keeping us on the straight and narrow. God knows I need it at all times.
It's been a pleasure to be with the subcommittee, and I'm glad that I'm still with the city and can work with you all still.
Here, here.
Do we
It'd
know
be
yet who's
totally-
taking over this
Okay.
position?
We are figuring out the exact staff member that will be handling the rules subcommittee. And once that change has been made, we'll make sure to notify council.
All right, thank you.
Yep, we're hoping to get somewhere on that topic next week. Just
And what
as a-
about programs and services?
Same, and Zap.
Ends that.
Yep.
We have been speaking internally, and we're looking, as soon as that is fully solidified, we will notify the council as well. I
Awesome.
just don't want to step on anyone's toes tonight.
We'll do that tomorrow. All right, thanks, everyone. Have a
Good
great
night.
Thursday, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.